Hey there viewers, have you ever witnessed someone completely lose control when they realized their power was slipping away? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Today's story takes us inside the courtroom, where Diddy's frustration boiled over and he tried to go after the judge. What happened next left everyone in shock. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The tension before the storm. They told me this was just another shift. That's what they always say before things go sideways. I'd worked at MDC Brooklyn long enough to know when something wasn't right, and today something felt off, the second I walked through those security gates. The place always carried a certain weight. Concrete walls soaked with desperation, fluorescent lights that hummed with the kind of endless monotony that could drive a man mad. But this morning there was something else in the air, something heavier. It wasn't just the inmates. The COs were on edge, the clerks were whispering, even the damn warden had that look like he'd rather be anywhere else. I knew why. John Combs, Diddy was getting transported to court today. I'd been keeping an eye on him like most of us had. It wasn't just because of who he was, though that played a part. When a man like that, a billionaire, a mogul, someone who once walked red carpets and commanded entire rooms, ends up here, people watch. They want to see how far he'll fall, how much he'll break. And Diddy had been breaking. When he first got here, he carried himself like someone who thought this was temporary, like it was all a misunderstanding that would be cleared up soon. He still had that arrogance, that untouchable aura. But time has a way of stripping a man down to his bones, and Diddy had lost that edge. His face was sunken, his beard patchy and gray, like someone who hadn't seen real sunlight in years. The jumpsuit hung off of him, his weight dropping more each time I saw him, but it was his eyes that had changed the most. Paranoia lived there now. I walked past his cell that morning, nodding to the officer on duty. Diddy was pacing, his lips moving, eyes darting to every corner of the room, as if he expected the walls themselves to start whispering to him. His movements were erratic, stopping suddenly, muttering under his breath, then starting again. The guards had learned not to engage when he got like this. It never led anywhere productive. "Sleep at all last night?" I asked the CO. "Nah," the guy grunted. Muttered the whole time. Kept saying they were trying to poison his food, that the cameras in here were watching him even when they were off. I glanced up at the corners of the cell where the security cameras blinked red. He refused to eat again. "No, he ate," the officer said, crossing his arms, but only after making one of the other inmates taste it first. I sighed. It wasn't the first time. Inside the cell, Diddy suddenly turned, locking eyes with me like he'd just realized I was there. His lips curled into something that was supposed to be a smile, but it never quite reached his eyes. "They're watching, you know," he said, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond. There was no point. His expression darkened. "They're gonna try something today." It was hard to tell whether he was talking about the prosecution, the judge, or some unseen force he'd conjured up in his own mind. I moved on, letting the officer deal with him. That was the rule in here. Keep it professional. Don't get sucked into their worlds. But as I made my rounds, I could hear the murmurs from the other inmates. "He's gonna snap today," one guy muttered to another. "Heard they're bringing out some new evidence," another whispered. "Something bad." The rumors spread like wildfire in here, and in a place where information was currency, everyone had their own theory. Some thought Diddy was done for, that today would be the final nail in his coffin. Others believed he had something planned, that he'd pull some trick out of his sleeve at the last second. Whatever it was, everyone agreed on one thing. Today was going to be different. I was there when they came to get him. The sound of keys in the lock, the heavy footsteps of officers moving in. Diddy didn't resist, he never did, but there was a tension in his shoulders as they shackled his wrists, as the cuffs clicked into place. His breathing was steady, but there was something else beneath it, something simmering just below the surface. We moved through the corridors, past the rows of inmates who lined up to watch. Some sneered, others smirked, a few just watched in silence, waiting. When we reached the exit doors, the cold air hit hard. The transport van was waiting, doors already open. The officers guided Diddy inside, and for a brief moment, as he stepped up, I saw his fingers tighten into fists. Then he was inside, and the doors shut behind him. The ride to the courthouse was quiet. Too quiet. Normally these rides were filled with some kind of noise, officers talking, the hum of the city outside. But today there was just silence, except for Diddy's breathing. Slow, measured, almost calculated. He didn't speak, didn't look at anyone, just kept his head slightly down, eyes fixed on something invisible in the space between us. There was a moment where I thought he might say something. He shifted slightly, his mouth opening just a fraction. Then he closed it again, his fingers tightening on the shackles around his wrists. We were almost there. The courthouse was just minutes away. I'd transported high-profile prisoners before, but there was something about this one that didn't sit right. I could feel it in my gut, the same instinct that told you when a fight was about to break out, or when an inmate was planning something behind those cold, dead eyes. And as we pulled up to the courthouse, the crowd outside swelling with reporters, protesters, and spectators, I had the same thought that had been nagging me since the moment I walked into MDC that morning. Something bad was going to happen today. Chapter 2. The courtroom's energy shifts. By the time we pulled up to the courthouse, the scene outside had transformed into something between a media circus and a street protest. The barricades barely contained the sea of bodies. Reporters gripping microphones, cameras flashing in a relentless frenzy, protesters holding signs that either condemned or defended Diddy with equal fervor. The noise was overwhelming, a chaotic blend of shouted questions, angry chants, and the distant hum of news vans broadcasting the spectacle to the world. I had expected the crowd, but not the intensity. Some held posters demanding justice, their voices sharp with anger as they screamed about the victims, about the allegations, about the things Diddy was accused of doing behind closed doors. Others were less concerned with morality and more fixated on power, die-hard fans who saw this as nothing more than another attempt to bring down a successful black man. Their signs bore messages of loyalty, their voices drowning in the mix of it all. The division was stark, and in the middle of it, just behind the courthouse steps, stood the hulking figure of a man who once ruled the music industry, now reduced to shackles and whispers of what he used to be. The moment the transport van doors swung open, the air shifted. Diddy stepped out, slow and deliberate, the flash of metal cuffs glinting under the early morning light. His shoulders squared, chin lifted just slightly, the ghost of his former bravado flickering across his features. But it wasn't confidence, not really. It was something else, something harder to define. There was a glint in his eye, a sharpness, a coiled tension just beneath the surface. He scanned the crowd, not in acknowledgement but in calculation. His expression remained neutral, but I had spent enough time around him to recognize when his mind was working overtime. The COs flanked him as we moved forward, the thick press of bodies behind the barricades surging forward, a wall of camera lenses and outstretched arms, desperate for a reaction. Diddy, do you have a statement? Are you guilty of the charges? Is it true about the Cassie video, about the trafficking allegations? Do you regret anything? Diddy ignored them, eyes forward, but there was something about the way his jaw flexed, the way his fingers twitched against the chains that told me their words weren't bouncing off him as easily as he wanted them to. The courthouse doors loomed ahead, and the second we stepped inside, the world outside disappeared. Inside it was cold, sterile and clinical, the kind of place where time moved slower, where the weight of justice, real or performative, settled heavy in the air. The marble floors gleamed under fluorescent lighting, footsteps echoing sharply against the walls as we moved down the hallway. The courtroom itself was already packed. Rows of journalists filled the press section, legal analysts and commentators whispering into their recorders, fingers poised over keyboards, ready to capture every shift in tone, every flicker of expression. The gallery was a mix of onlookers, some connected to the case, some just there for the spectacle. Diddy's defense team stood near the front, waiting for his arrival, their faces tight with unease. They had the look of men who had already lost before the trial even started. One of them, a wiry man with graying hair and deep-set eyes, was whispering furiously to another, hands moving in sharp, anxious gestures. They knew something was coming. The prosecution, on the other hand, was a picture of controlled expectation. They sat stiff back and silent, eyes flicking toward Diddy as he was guided toward his seat at the defense table. There was no gloating, no overt signs of triumph, but there was something in their posture, in the way they exchanged brief glances, that suggested they were waiting for the inevitable. And then the judge entered. The room fell silent. Judge Malcolm Tierney was not a man known for his patience. He had a reputation for cutting through theatrics, for refusing to entertain unnecessary delays. He was the kind of judge who saw through the carefully crafted performances of defense teams, who had no interest in whether the man in front of him was a billionaire or a nobody. As he settled into his seat, his gaze flicked toward Diddy, and for the first time I saw something shift in the defendant's expression. Diddy had been slouched, uninterested, his posture loose in a way that might have been mistaken for confidence but was closer to detachment. But when he looked at Judge Tierney, something in his face hardened. His fingers curled, his shoulders straightened just slightly. The legal proceedings began, the formalities rolling out in a steady, practiced rhythm. Charges were read, procedural matters addressed, the judge's voice calm and deliberate as he laid out the agenda for the day. Diddy barely reacted, his head tilted slightly, lips pressed together in what might have been boredom. But then the evidence began to roll out. The prosecution wasted no time. They started with financial records, transactions, wire transfers, payments made under names that didn't belong to him but all traced back to the same accounts, deals that on the surface looked legitimate but, when peeled back, told a much darker story. Diddy's fingers drummed lightly against the table, an almost absent-minded motion, but his eyes stayed locked on the screens where the evidence was displayed. Then came the testimonies, statements from former employees, former associates, people who had worked for him, had been close enough to see behind the curtain, who had once been loyal but now sat on the other side, providing the kind of details that only someone deep inside his world could know. His jaw tightened, and then the Cassie video. The clip was grainy but clear enough. A hotel hallway. A woman, Cassie Ventura. The timestamp read 2016. The sound was muted, but the footage spoke for itself. A man, Diddy, moving fast, aggressive, a shove, a struggle, Cassie hitting the floor. The courtroom didn't react loudly, but the tension was palpable. Even the air felt heavier. Diddy didn't move at first. He sat there, watching, his body unnaturally still. His fingers, which had been steadily drumming against the table, stopped cold. Then, quietly at first, he muttered something under his breath. It was so low that only the people closest to him noticed, his attorneys, the officers at his side. At first they ignored it, thinking it was just another tick, just another sign of a man losing grip. But then he did it again, louder. And again. His lawyer leaned toward him, whispering, probably telling him to calm down, to control himself, but Diddy wasn't listening. His lips were moving rapidly now, the words coming out too fast to be fully understood, but there was an edge to them, something sharp and splintered. His body had gone rigid, his fingers twitching slightly, his breathing just a fraction too shallow. The prosecution continued speaking, but even they noticed it now. The judge glanced up, eyes narrowing slightly. The murmuring in the gallery grew. Diddy's muttering didn't stop. He was unraveling piece by piece, right there in the middle of the courtroom. Chapter 3: The Evidence That Broke Him. The prosecution didn't waste time. They had come prepared, moving methodically, unraveling years of secrets with the ease of someone peeling away layers of a rotting foundation. It was slow at first, a foundation of financial records, documents, transactions that painted an undeniable picture of manipulation, coercion, and the deliberate creation of a system that allowed Diddy to operate in shadows. The paper trail was damning, but it wasn't what people had come for. The tension in the room didn't shift until they moved to the part everyone had been anticipating. The screen lit up, and suddenly the past was no longer distant. The footage wasn't grainy anymore. This was no leaked tabloid video with poor quality and missing details. This was direct evidence, the kind that was undeniable, the kind that didn't leave room for doubt. The timestamp was clear: 2016, a hallway, Cassie, Diddy. The seconds dragged as the video rolled, each frame hitting with a weight that couldn't be ignored. Cassie was walking quickly, her body language stiff, tense. Diddy followed close behind, his stride longer, faster, closing the distance between them. Then came the shove, hard enough that Cassie stumbled, hitting the wall, one hand coming up instinctively as if she could push back a force that was twice her size. Then another lunge, his hands on her shoulders, the raw aggression in his movements so apparent that even in silence the courtroom felt the impact. There was no audio, but it wasn't necessary. The body language spoke for itself. The sheer dominance in the way he moved, the lack of hesitation, the overwhelming sense of power. Cassie trying to pull away, his grip tightening, the moment she was pushed down. The video cut before the worst of it could be shown, but the damage had been done. The courtroom wasn't silent anymore. There was a shift in the air, a low murmur rippling through the gallery. A few gasps. Someone exhaled sharply. Even the reporters, seasoned in covering court cases, seemed momentarily thrown off. The kind of shock that comes when you expect something terrible, but seeing it unfold still punches the breath out of you. Diddy didn't move at first. He sat rigid, his fingers curled around the edge of the defense table, knuckles pressing white against the surface. His jaw was tight, his breathing suddenly more noticeable, short, controlled bursts through his nose. The tension in his shoulders made his entire frame look like it was wound too tight, like a wire pulled to the edge of snapping. Then, under his breath, he muttered something. It was too soft for most to catch, but his attorney did. The man shifted beside him, subtly glancing over, whispering something back, something meant to calm, to de-escalate before things got out of hand. Diddy didn't respond. He kept watching the screen, but his grip on the table tightened, the muscles in his forearm flexing. The prosecution continued, stepping forward, their voice steady, controlled. The defense claims this footage has been altered, they said, their tone clipped with just enough authority to make it clear they weren't here to entertain theories. However, multiple forensic analysts have verified the authenticity of this video. The original files were retrieved directly from the hotel's security system, and the metadata confirms there has been no tampering. The words hit like hammer strikes. Diddy twitched. It was barely noticeable at first, a slight jerk of the shoulder, the smallest shift in his posture. Then came the first crack in his composure. His head tilted just slightly, and he scoffed. A dry, humorless sound that didn't match the weight of the evidence against him. Lies, he muttered. The attorneys at his side stiffened. One of them placed a careful hand on his arm, a subtle warning to stay quiet. But he wasn't listening. "This is bullshit," he said louder, his voice cutting through the courtroom's thick silence. He leaned forward now, his hands flat on the table, his entire frame coiled like he was ready to lunge across the room. "This is all fabricated. You think I don't know how this works? You think I don't know what you people are trying to do?" The judge's gavel hit once. "Mr. Combs, you will remain silent while the prosecution presents their case." Diddy ignored him. He turned his head, scanning the room like he was trying to lock onto something or someone. His eyes flickered, landing momentarily on members of the press, on the prosecutors, on the faces of people who had come just to watch him fall. "This is a setup," he snapped, his voice now carrying a sharp edge. "I know exactly what this is. You want to take me out? You want to turn me into some kind of example?" His hands clenched into fists on the table. "This is some government-planted bullshit. Those tapes aren't real. This whole thing is fake." His lawyers moved quickly, one of them pressing a hand against his shoulder, trying to force him back down into his seat. "Sean, stop. You need to—" Diddy shoved him off, not hard but enough that the courtroom felt it, enough that his own legal team froze, their expressions flashing from concern to something much closer to fear. The judge's voice came sharp this time. "Mr. Combs, this is your final warning. Sit down. Now." Diddy's breath was coming faster. His fingers curled, then uncurled. His gaze was locked onto the prosecution now, as if he was trying to burn a hole through them with nothing but sheer force of will. He opened his mouth again, and for a second it looked like he was going to keep pushing, keep screaming, keep unraveling in front of the entire world. His attorneys scrambled. One of them was already on their feet, hands raised as they tried to salvage the situation. "Your Honor, we're requesting a brief recess." Request denied. The judge's voice was final, firm. "Mr. Combs has been given multiple warnings, and I will not allow further disruption. This is a courtroom, not a spectacle." He turned his attention back to the prosecution. "Proceed." Diddy let out a sharp exhale, something between a scoff and a growl. His fingers drummed against the table again, but he didn't speak this time. Not yet. But he was close. Too close. The prosecution resumed, but the balance in the room had shifted. The composure that Diddy had tried to hold on to had cracked wide open. His team knew it, the judge knew it, the press knew it. And Diddy himself, he knew it too. Because no matter how much he raged, no matter how much he denied, no matter how much he wanted to believe that he could talk his way out of this, the evidence was real. And for the first time since this trial had started, he realized he wasn't the one in control anymore. Chapter 4. The moment everything exploded. It happened so fast that for a split second, the entire courtroom seemed to freeze in place, the air thick and electric with the weight of what was about to unfold. Diddy's breathing had already been growing heavier, his fingers twitching on the edge of the defense table, his jaw locked so tightly it looked like his teeth might shatter under the pressure. Every muscle in his body had been wound so tight, it was as if he was a bomb waiting for the right moment to go off. And then, in one violent motion, he snapped. The first sound was the thunderous slam of his fists against the polished wood of the defense table, a crack so loud it cut through every murmur, every whisper, commanding the attention of everyone in the room. Papers jumped from their neatly stacked piles, some flying off the table entirely. His attorneys flinched, their faces tightening with something between panic and helplessness, because they knew this wasn't something they could control anymore. The security officers near the courtroom entrance tensed immediately. They had been trained for moments like this, but nothing in their experience had prepared them for the sight of a man who once stood at the pinnacle of power, now unraveling in front of the world with all the fury of someone who had nothing left to lose. He shot up from his seat, his entire frame vibrating with unchecked rage. "You people think you can do this to me?" His voice, thick with fury, echoed off the high ceilings, bouncing through the rows of spectators and reporters who were now watching with a mix of fascination and horror. "You think I don't see what's happening here? You think I don't know what you're trying to do?" His lawyer, the older one with the graying hair and exhausted eyes, reached out, attempting to place a hand on his arm, to ground him, to stop him from going any further down this road. But Diddy wrenched himself free so violently that the man nearly stumbled backward. "Nah." Diddy spat, shaking his head, eyes darting from the prosecution to the judge to the gallery where journalists were furiously scribbling notes, fingers dancing over keyboards. "This is a setup. This whole thing. All of it." His voice climbed, no longer carrying the slow, measured arrogance of a man who thought he was above it all. This was different. This was desperation, paranoia clawing its way out of him like something alive, something that had been festering for too long. He jabbed a finger toward the prosecution's table, his hand shaking slightly. "You work for them. You all do. You think I don't know about the deals being made behind closed doors? You think I don't know that this—" He gestured wildly at the courtroom, at the judge, at the entire judicial system itself—was planned from the start? You people have been trying to take me down for years. The judge, who up until now had remained still, watching, absorbing, finally spoke. "Mr. Combs, you are out of order. Sit down immediately." Diddy ignored him. His entire body pulsed with something close to hysteria. He turned his gaze to the gallery, his eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for someone, for something. His lips curled into something that might have once been a smirk, but now only looked like the remnants of a fractured mind trying to piece itself together in real time. "This ain't about justice," he continued, voice dropping to a low growl, making the room lean in, listening closer. "This ain't about the truth. Y'all think you can paint me as a monster, drag my name through the dirt, put my life on trial." His voice cracked, but he swallowed it down, forced his composure back, if only for a second. "But I know what this really is. This is about power. Y'all want to make an example out of me, but I built this industry. You hear me? I made it." The judge struck his gavel down. "That is enough, Mr. Combs. If you do not sit down right now, I will hold you in contempt." Diddy's expression twisted. The veins in his neck pulsed, and for a brief moment his breathing slowed just enough that it seemed like he might comply. But then, just as quickly, his lips moved again, murmuring something too soft for anyone but the closest few to hear. His lawyer, still frozen beside him, paled. One of the prosecutors frowned, subtly shifting in their seat, as if suddenly aware that something was deeply, deeply wrong. And then, like a trigger being pulled, Diddy moved. It wasn't a lunge, not at first. It was a shift, a subtle but predatory tilt of his weight that sent a ripple through the room before anyone could even process what was happening. 1 second he was standing there, vibrating with fury, and the next, he exploded forward. It wasn't toward the judge, not immediately. His first movement was toward the prosecution's table, toward the people who had stood against him, who had pieced together the puzzle of his sins and laid them out for the world to see. His hand shot out, fast, erratic, almost as if he were trying to grab something or someone. The reaction was immediate. One of the security officers stationed near the front moved, stepping forward to intercept, but Diddy had already altered his trajectory. It was only a feint, only the first move in what had been building inside of him for weeks, months, maybe even years. Because as soon as the security officer reached for him, Diddy pivoted, his body twisting in a way that seemed too fast for someone who had once been shackled by exhaustion, by stress, by fear. And this time, his target was clear. The judge. Gasps erupted. Chairs scraped against the floor as bodies shifted, as the controlled order of the courtroom shattered into chaos. Diddy surged toward the bench, a guttural, inhuman sound ripping from his throat, something between a roar and a scream. It wasn't just anger. It was something deeper, something primal, something that had been clawing at his insides long before he ever stepped foot into that courtroom. But he never made it. The security officers moved in at the same time, bodies colliding, hands grabbing at his arms, his torso, dragging him down, just as his fingertips barely grazed the polished wood of the judge's bench. The force of the takedown was brutal. Diddy hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. His body twisted, thrashing violently, his voice now reduced to incoherent shouts, curses, fragmented accusations that barely made sense. His legs kicked out, one striking against the floor so hard that the sound echoed through the cavernous space. The judge had already moved back, his face unreadable, but his hand was raised, motioning for more officers to step in. Diddy was still fighting. He was still trying to get up, to claw his way out from under the pile of bodies restraining him. But the more he struggled, the more futile it became. By the time they had him fully subdued, face pressed against the cold tile, wrists twisted behind his back, restraints biting into his skin, his voice had become hoarse, ragged, reduced to bare murmurs. His breath came in uneven bursts, his chest rising and falling like a man who had run too hard, too fast, only to find himself exactly where he started. For the first time since the trial had started, there was no more defiance in his face, no more arrogance, no more carefully crafted facade. Only raw, unfiltered, undeniable defeat. And the cameras caught all of it. Chapter 5. The Fallout in Court. The sound of the judge's gavel cracked like a gunshot, but it was barely audible over the chaos that had swallowed the courtroom whole. The order for an emergency recess had been issued, but it was meaningless in the moment, because no one was moving. No one was thinking about recesses or legal proceedings. All eyes were on the scene in front of them, frozen in shock, disbelief, or in some cases, something dangerously close to amusement. Diddy was still fighting. Even with his face pressed against the floor, even with 3 security officers pinning him down, he refused to accept that it was over. His breath came in heaving, uneven bursts, his entire body shaking under the strain of his own resistance. The veins in his arms bulged as he tried to push himself up again, only for one of the officers to slam him back down, knee digging hard between his shoulder blades. His words, once sharp and precise, had deteriorated into fragmented, breathless accusations. Y'all working together. I see it, I see all of it. His voice was hoarse now, strained from shouting, but the venom was still there, laced through every syllable. They planted this, you hear me? His head twisted slightly, one eye darting wildly toward the judge's bench, toward the prosecution's table, toward anyone who would listen. This is bullshit. The judge, who had been standing for a moment in pure stillness, watching, assessing, finally turned to the bailiffs with a short, clipped order. Remove him from my courtroom. Now. Diddy jerked against his restraints, his lips curling into something that was supposed to be a smirk, but the rage in his eyes swallowed whatever arrogance he had left. Yeah, that's right, get me out of here, he sneered, his voice breaking into something closer to a growl. You don't want me talking? You don't want the truth getting out? The murmurs in the gallery swelled again. There was no single reaction. There were gasps of horror, yes, but there was also laughter, sharp, mocking. A few people in the back were chuckling openly, as if they had just witnessed the final act of a long, drawn-out comedy. Some of the reporters weren't even pretending to be discreet anymore. A woman in a navy blazer, sitting near the front, was typing furiously on her laptop, fingers moving so fast over the keyboard that they blurred. A cameraman in the gallery had his phone up, his lens locked onto the scene, even as a security officer moved toward him, warning him to stop recording. Diddy saw it all. He saw the reactions, the stifled laughter, the pity, the detached professionalism of the reporters who were already framing their next headlines. And it fueled him. You think this is funny? His voice had cracked now, slipping into something unstable, something raw. He was still pinned down, still trapped beneath the weight of multiple men holding him in place. But he thrashed once more, a final act of resistance, a final refusal to go quietly. I built this whole industry. I made you people. You wouldn't exist without me. The security officers moved quickly now, one of them gripping him under his arm, another locking a firm hand against his wrist restraints as they dragged him up to his feet. His head lolled slightly, sweat glistening on his forehead, his jumpsuit wrinkled and stretched from the struggle. He was panting hard, his chest rising and falling in sharp, uneven bursts. But his eyes were still alive with something dangerous. And when he turned his gaze toward the prosecution, toward the attorneys who had sat calmly through the entire ordeal, his lips curled back into something that might have once resembled a smile, but now only looked like a fractured man trying to hold onto the last remnants of his pride. "You think you won." His voice was lower now, raspier but still thick with something sinister. "This ain't over." The lead prosecutor, a tall, dark-haired woman who had barely reacted throughout the entire outburst, finally leaned back in her seat. Her face remained unreadable, her expression carefully measured, but there was something cold in the way she regarded him, something dismissive. Diddy's smirk faltered, just for a second. She hadn't taken the bait. She hadn't flinched. That realization seemed to hit him harder than the physical force of being taken down moments ago. She had expected this. The prosecution knew this was going to happen. And worse, they had wanted it to happen. Diddy had played right into their hands. The security officers began escorting him out, their grips firm, unyielding. The moment his feet stumbled forward, the cameras outside would catch everything. The disheveled jumpsuit, the disoriented look in his eyes, the sheer humiliation of being dragged away from his own trial like a violent criminal instead of the mogul he once was. And the world would see it. His legacy, his reputation, his entire empire, gone in a matter of minutes. He tried to twist around one last time, trying to meet the judge's gaze, trying to get one final word in, but the bailiff holding his arm tightened his grip, a silent warning to keep moving. And so he did. Through the courtroom doors, past the whispering spectators, past the murmuring journalists, past the silent acknowledgement that, for all the power he had once wielded, there was nothing left of it now. By the time the doors slammed shut behind him, the room sat in a stunned silence for several seconds, as if no one quite knew how to react to what had just happened. The judge exhaled, ran a hand down his face, then spoke again, his voice carrying through the courtroom with renewed authority. "We will reconvene after a short recess." And just like that, it was back to business. The reporters scrambled from their seats, rushing to their phones and laptops, their voices overlapping in frantic whispers. The legal analysts whispered to each other, already forming their theories, their explanations for the breakdown, the angles they'd take when reporting it to the public. The prosecution remained eerily composed. One of them, the dark-haired woman who had refused to react to Diddy's outburst, simply reached for her notes, adjusting them neatly in front of her as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. Because to her, it hadn't. This had been inevitable. Diddy had just given them exactly what they needed. And for the first time since the trial had started, it was clear this wasn't just about winning anymore. This was about making sure there was no coming back. Chapter 6. Back to MDC Brooklyn. The van ride back to MDC Brooklyn was suffocating, not because of the heat, there was none. The ventilation system in the transport vehicle rattled above, spewing stale, cold air that barely stirred the weight of what had just happened. It was suffocating in a different way, the kind of heaviness that settled in a man's chest when he realized the walls around him were closing in, that the ground beneath his feet had vanished, that there was no next move, no next plan. Diddy sat hunched forward, wrists shackled, legs shackled, body rocking slightly with every bump in the road. The silence in the van was almost unbearable. The officers who sat across from him weren't speaking, weren't even looking at him, not like before. When he first got here, there was always that lingering stare, that curiosity in their eyes. Some of them had looked at him with disdain, others with mild amusement, but now they didn't even bother. He had become just another inmate. He could feel it in the way they handled him, in the way they had thrown him into the transport like he was nothing special, no different from any other violent criminal who had lost control in a courtroom. He wasn't a billionaire mogul in their eyes anymore. He wasn't hip-hop royalty. He was a problem to be restrained, a file in a system that had already moved past him. The weight of the shackles pressed into his skin, cold and unrelenting. He flexed his fingers slightly, testing the limits of his movement, feeling the stiff resistance of the cuffs biting against his wrists. He could feel the slight tremor in his hands, a leftover effect of the rage that had consumed him just minutes ago. But his face remained expressionless. He forced it to. He needed to control something, even if it was just his expression. The van jolted suddenly as it pulled up to the prison gates. The first sound in what felt like hours was the heavy clank of the steel doors as they slid open, followed by the low murmur of voices as the correctional officers outside prepared to process him back in. The vehicle lurched forward again, rolling through the sally port, past the tall gray fences topped with razor wire. The thought nearly made him laugh, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that had warmth behind it. It was the kind of laugh that crawled up the throat like bile, the kind that carried nothing but bitterness. The doors swung open, and the officers moved quickly, grabbing him by the arms, pulling him forward. His body moved on autopilot. He didn't resist, but he also didn't help them. He let them drag him through the intake area, past the same rows of cells, past the familiar faces of inmates who now pressed up against their doors, watching the spectacle unfold. Murmurs spread like wildfire. "He's back already? Damn, what he do now? I told y'all he losing his mind." He kept his head forward, eyes locked straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge them. He could feel their stares, their smirks, their amusement at watching the downfall of a man who once stood at the top. Some of them had once admired him. Some of them still did in a way, but admiration didn't mean anything in here. Respect had to be maintained, and right now he was dangerously close to losing what little he had left. The guards marched him down the corridor, past general population, past the rec yard, past everything, until they reached a separate wing of the facility. He didn't need to ask where they were taking him. He already knew. Solitary. The door was already open when they brought him in. A 6x9 concrete box, no windows, no real light except for the dull, flickering bulb overhead. A steel bed frame bolted to the wall, a thin mattress, a toilet in the corner. In silence. That was the worst part. The moment the officers removed his shackles and stepped back, the heavy metal door slammed shut behind him with a sound that echoed through his bones. He didn't move at first. He just stood there, shoulders rising and falling with each breath, staring at the door. The walls seemed to close in around him, the weight of the small space pressing against his skin, against his mind. No voices, no music, no distractions. Just him. The laughter came before he could stop it. It was quiet at first, just a breath, just a chuckle. But it grew, rolling up his throat, spilling out in short, stilted bursts that sounded almost foreign to his own ears. He wasn't even sure what he was laughing at. Maybe at the absurdity of it all. Maybe at the fact that for years he had built an empire, surrounded himself with people, with power, with walls so high he had convinced himself they were impenetrable. And now? Now he was in a box. No phone calls, no visitors, no lawyers hovering around him whispering strategies in his ear, no assistants fetching him drinks, no music blaring through mansion speakers. Just cold concrete and silence. He pressed his fingers against his temples, rubbing slow, methodical circles, trying to steady his breathing. He needed to think. He needed to plan. There had to be a way out of this. There was always a way out, wasn't there? The laughter faded as quickly as it had come, leaving nothing but the hollow ring of its absence in the tiny room. He turned, pacing the length of the cell, 4 steps to the door, 4 steps back. His mind raced, trying to latch onto something, anything, that would give him an advantage. He muttered under his breath, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "They think they got me." Another step. Another turn. "They think this is the end." He could hear his own voice bouncing off the walls, the echoes making it sound like someone else was speaking. "They don't know who they're dealing with." He dragged a hand down his face, exhaling slowly. He needed time, that was all. He just needed to think, to gather himself. They wanted him to crack. They wanted to break him down in here, let the isolation do the work that prison hadn't done yet. But he wasn't broken. Not yet. He sat down on the edge of the steel frame, resting his elbows on his knees, hands clasped together in front of him. His eyes traced the small cracks in the concrete floor, the faded scuff marks from the countless others who had been in this same cell before him. Time moved differently in solitary. Hours stretched like days. The absence of sound played tricks on the mind, making it hard to tell what was real and what was just a product of the loneliness eating away at the brain. He had seen men lose themselves in here. Strong men, loud men, men who swore they could handle anything until they were left alone with nothing but their own thoughts. But he wasn't like them. He had survived worse. He had built empires, torn people down, manipulated, strategized, adapted. This was just another obstacle. He just had to make it through the night, and the next one, and the one after that, one day at a time. Because no matter what they thought, no matter how many doors they locked behind him, no matter how many people watched his downfall with glee, this wasn't over. Not yet. Chapter 7. The aftermath in the media and legal system. The footage hit the internet before the courtroom had even emptied. Someone had managed to record it, whether it was a journalist with a discreet phone, a courtroom sketch artist who had captured the moment with just enough detail to make it recognizable, or a leaked security feed that somehow found its way onto the right hands. It didn't matter. Within minutes, it was everywhere. News anchors on every major network led with it. Breaking news from Manhattan Federal Court. Sean Diddy Combs, the once revered hip-hop mogul, has just been forcibly removed from the courtroom after an unprecedented outburst during his ongoing trial. Shocking new footage just in. Combs was seen lunging at the prosecution's table before attempting to approach the judge's bench, prompting immediate intervention by security forces. Social media is on fire right now as video clips of the courtroom chaos circulate online. Hashtags like Diddy Breakdown, Courtroom Chaos, and Guilty Already are trending worldwide. The angles varied. Some showed the moment of the lunge, the split second where Diddy seemed to snap, his body lunging forward before he was tackled to the ground. Others showed the aftermath, the disheveled jumpsuit, the sweat dripping down his face, the way his eyes darted wildly as they dragged him out, his mouth still moving, still muttering something no one could quite make out. Commentary flooded in from every corner of the internet. Journalists and legal analysts dissected every second of the footage, speculating what this would mean for his trial, what new charges might be stacked against him. Psychologists weighed in on live TV, offering theories about his mental state, about whether this was the inevitable unraveling of a man who had spent too long believing he was invincible. Memes hit social media at an unforgiving speed. One of the most viral was a still frame of the moment security tackled him, his face mid-scream, frozen in an expression that was equal parts fury and disbelief. Someone had captioned it, "When you realize money can't buy everything." Another showed a photoshopped image of him in a straitjacket, the words "Diddy's new album dropping soon, institutionalized," written across it. It was brutal, and it wasn't just the public turning against him. The real blow came within hours, when his legal team began to splinter. The first to resign was attorney William Price, the senior defense lawyer who had been handling most of the high-profile aspects of the case. His resignation letter was vague, filled with the usual legal jargon about irreconcilable differences in defense strategy and inability to continue effective representation. But everyone knew the truth. Price wasn't willing to go down with the ship. Within the next day, 2 more attorneys from his defense firm followed. One released a statement emphasizing that their departure had nothing to do with Combs' guilt or innocence, but rather the difficulty of managing a case that has taken on a life of its own in the court of public opinion. Translation: Diddy is unsalvageable, and we refuse to destroy our reputations trying to save him. The remaining members of his legal team scrambled to do damage control, but it was already too late. The moment lawyers start abandoning ship, it sends a message that things are worse than they appear, that even the people being paid to fight for him don't believe there's anything left worth saving. Prosecutors wasted no time capitalizing on it. Within 48 hours of the courtroom incident, an announcement came down from the DA's office. Diddy would be facing new charges. The courtroom outburst had given them exactly what they needed. The assault attempt, because that's what they were officially calling it now, an attempted assault on a judge, was enough to add on additional criminal charges. Courtroom security had already submitted formal statements detailing the moment he broke from his seat, the way he lunged forward, the intent behind his movements. The legal analysts had a field day with it. "This isn't just bad optics. This is a game changer," one expert said during a CNN panel. "Judges don't take lightly to threats, even perceived ones. When you attack someone inside a courtroom, it's not just a disruption, it's a direct challenge to the authority of the judicial system itself." If the prosecution wanted to paint him as unhinged, as someone incapable of being rehabilitated, well, he just did the work for them, another analyst on MSNBC added. This is the kind of behavior that pushes judges to hand down maximum sentences. And that was the real issue. This wasn't just about public humiliation. This was about the fact that now, Diddy wasn't just facing his original charges, the ones tied to racketeering, trafficking, and abuse, the ones that had already guaranteed he would never walk free again. Now he had something else stacked against him, something the judge himself would personally rule on, and everyone knew what that meant. Judges have long memories. They don't forget the people who challenge their authority. They don't forget the ones who try to turn their courtroom into a spectacle. So when the trial resumed, when the sentencing phase inevitably arrived, it wouldn't just be about the charges anymore. It would be personal. There was no salvaging this. And deep down, even in the cold isolation of MDC Brooklyn, even in the silence of his solitary cell, Diddy had to know it. He wasn't a mogul anymore. He wasn't a king. He was just another inmate, waiting for the final verdict to come down. Chapter 8. A man who lost it all. The walls of the cell didn't speak. They never did. But they had a way of swallowing sound, of trapping every whisper, every breath, every muttered curse and swallowed sob. They absorbed time, stretched it, made minutes feel like hours and hours feel like days. And in the stillness of that small concrete box, Sean Combs, once known as Diddy, sat motionless, his back against the cold surface, his hands limp at his sides, his eyes fixed on a spot in the distance that wasn't really there. There was no music now. No bass vibrating through penthouse walls, no crowds chanting his name, no flashing lights, no velvet ropes parting at his command. The echoes of it all had faded, leaving only the dull, rhythmic hum of fluorescent lights overhead and the occasional shuffle of a guard's boots outside his door. How long had it been since the outburst in court? Days? Weeks? Time didn't move the same way in solitary. There were no windows to mark the shift from morning to night, no sounds of the outside world filtering through the cracks. Just meals slid through a slot in the door, the occasional sharp voice of a correctional officer telling him to get up, to step back, to show his hands through the bars. They had taken away everything. No visitors, no phone privileges, no access to the outside world beyond the newspapers that came in late, crumpled and creased, their ink smudged from being handled by too many people before reaching him, and even those were more of a curse than a comfort, because his name was still everywhere. Not the way it used to be, not at the top of Forbes lists, not in the music charts, not tied to new ventures, new deals, new success stories. Now, he existed only in the margins of scandal, his name dragged through headline after headline, every article a post-mortem of his fall from grace. Combs faces additional charges after courtroom outburst. Former hip-hop muggle's defense team in shambles as sentencing nears. Diddy Combs, from empire to inmate, the man who lost it all. Every journalist, every media outlet, every talking head was dissecting him now, speaking about him like he was already a relic of the past, a cautionary tale instead of a man who once commanded entire industries. They weren't speculating about whether he would be found guilty anymore. That was a foregone conclusion. Now they were just waiting for the final number. How many years would the judge hand down? Would he ever walk free again? He leaned his head back against the wall, exhaling slowly through his nose, his fingers curling slightly against his knee. He tried not to think about it, tried not to think about what was coming. But in the absence of distractions, in the silence of a life stripped down to nothing but a 6x9 cage, thoughts had a way of creeping in. The faces of those who had turned against him, the ones who had once sworn loyalty, the ones who had built their careers alongside him, only to vanish when the headlines changed. His lawyers, his business partners, the artists who had once called him a mentor, a brother, the women, the ones who had spoken out, the ones who had given their statements, the ones whose testimonies had sealed his fate. Their voices came in waves, some clearer than others, some just murmurs at the edge of his mind. Accusations, confessions, things he had long since buried beneath money, beneath influence, beneath the certainty that none of it would ever touch him. He had been wrong. The prison door clanked open, jarring him from his thoughts. A guard stood there, his face impassive, his tone clipped. "On your feet, Combs. Time to go." He didn't ask where. He already knew. His sentencing. The chains came next. Shackles around his wrists, another set locked around his ankles. The weight was familiar now, the cold bite of metal against skin, something he no longer flinched at. He moved when they told him to, stepping out of the cell, walking the path laid out for him. The halls of MDC Brooklyn stretched long and empty in the early morning light. He could hear voices from other units, the occasional shout, the distant clang of another cell door slamming shut. And then the transport van. The ride to the courthouse felt longer this time. Maybe because there was nothing left to anticipate. No more strategies to discuss. No more plans to salvage what couldn't be salvaged. His defense team was still there, at least the few who hadn't already abandoned him. But they had nothing left to say. They knew what was coming. So did he. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the gallery, cameras positioned just outside the doors, capturing every second of his arrival. The judge sat at the bench, his face unreadable, his hands folded in front of him. The prosecution sat calmly, their case already won, their work already finished. And Diddy. He sat at the defense table, hands clasped, eyes forward, silent. No outbursts this time, no shouting, no accusations of conspiracies, no defiance, no arrogance. Because deep down, he knew it was over. The judge's voice cut through the courtroom, firm and unwavering. "Mr. Combs, you have been found guilty on multiple counts, including racketeering, coercion, and aggravated assault. After reviewing all submitted evidence and considering the nature of these crimes, this court hereby sentences you to..." The words blurred. 30 years. The number landed like a hammer strike, final and unmovable. It might as well have been a life sentence. By the time he got out, if he ever got out, he would be an old man, his legacy nothing but a footnote in history, a name that once held power but now only carried shame. He didn't react. Didn't move. The courtroom buzzed, reporters typing frantically, whispers spreading through the gallery like wildfire. But he just sat there. And for the first time in his life, Diddy had nothing left to say.